Hello, everyone. I'm Helen McGrath, LLG's Executive Director of Policy and Governance, and I'm joined this week by Dennis Hall, our Bulletin Editor. Hi, Dennis.
Hello, Helen.
So what are we going to discuss this week, Dennis?
Well, inevitably, I thought we would take a look at the general election, but from the perspective of standards. Well, there we have it. The general election has been announced, and it's a summer election, unusual in itself. It takes place, of course, on Thursday, the 4th of July. And just out of interest, the last summer election was in the summer of 1945. And before you ask, no, I was not involved in that one.
Yeah.
There's been much febrile anticipation about this election. It's as if it's already begun, actually, isn't it? And the PM's announcement was not as great a surprise as it might have been. Except, did you see how wet he got? That was extraordinary. Anyway, our business is not the politics or the campaign,
Nope.
except insofar as we'll discuss it in relation to standards, because over the next 6 weeks, there'll be preparations for the elections themselves alongside the politics. But there will be standards and behaviours that will be expected too. Now, interestingly, I've been involved in elections between 1983 and 2017. And looking back over the number of general elections I was involved in, some of them were turning points. And frankly, I really do feel that this one is going to be a turning point too. Now, back to that issue of standards and ethics. Enter Doug Chalmers, the new chair of the Committee on Standards in Public Life. Very early last Thursday, I wonder if he knew something before everybody else, but early last Thursday, he did something new and very original. Before the election announcement was made, he wrote to political leaders and candidates to remind them about what really matters in how politicians relate to each other during the campaign. Interesting, isn't it? Helen, what did Doug Chalmers begin by saying to all candidates? You may be able to recall it from your research.
Doug Chalmers began by addressing all candidates standing in the forthcoming general election, so all of them, and he thanked them for standing up and being prepared to play a part in public life, which we can't overlook, to serve their constituents and the democratic process, and to take on the responsibilities of public office. But he also said that he was aware that politicians from all parties regularly experience abuse and intimidation. We know that, we've talked about it. And his committee have a long-standing commitment to improving the quality of political life and to ensuring that everyone with the energy, commitment and desire to serve the public feels able to stand for public office. Brilliant sentiments. And in that respect, the tone of political debate matters greatly, he said, especially in electoral campaigns. So I think there are very genuine concerns about how the next 6 weeks will pan out. We've seen more volatility rather in elections. They've been far less tolerant, much less respect across the board. Election interference, I understand, is expected, as well as the deployment of social media interventions and the use of deep fakes and no doubt countless algorithms. So it's an interesting one, Dennis.
It is. And the committee say that they do not underestimate the intense nature of election campaigns, and they must recognise that robust debate is a vital and important part of the democratic process. However, Chalmers said it is vitally important that disagreement should be expressed in a civil manner. Well, let's hope so. As a candidate, actions and words will inevitably influence wider public discourse, he said, and political culture will be affected too. And all of this will have implications for the public's views on trust in our democratic institutions. Chalmers says that that is why the committee are writing to express their hope now for a civil and respectful campaign during the forthcoming general election, to underscore the standards expected of all those in public life, and to encourage those candidates to engage in constructive debate, which does not resort to personal attacks or divisive rhetoric, which we've seen in recent years. Well, again, let's hope so, and all fingers crossed. Do you think this approach will help? I do recall, this is the first time that the committee have made a direct approach of this kind. I can't recall anything like it before.
Oh, I think you could be right there, Dennis. Neither can I. I mean, look, the committee has a great reputation, I think, for solid ethical direction, holding others to account. And it's really a sad indictment of the times we're now living in, that they've had to take such an approach. I just want to make that point first. And it ought to be a given. Yeah, the fact that they've written in
Yes.
these terms clearly suggests that it isn't, is it? And I think we all know that, really. I've personally long held the belief that behaviour at national level absolutely affects the behaviour of those at local level.
Yes.
I don't think I'm alone in that. Yeah. And I wonder how much too the behaviour at national level informs the behaviour of certain corners of the population in how they address their concerns and their frustrations against local councillors. And by that I mean the alarming figures of abuse and harassment against councillors and MPs, which I have to say seems only to be increasing, and the LGA's campaign bears that out. I mean, Mike Freer, the Justice Minister and Conservative MP for Finchley and Golders Green, he stepped down. He's an example of someone who stepped down this year, having said that a constant string of incidents, which included death threats, abuse, he said narrow escapes, and that had made his decision for him to step down in the next election. And I have to say, his constituency office was actually a target of a suspected arson attack over the last Christmas. So horrible, horrific. So I think that good behaviour comes from leaders modelling, demonstrating and exempling high standards and ethical conduct. And whether it's the desired effect, whether the committee have the desired effect, who can say, but perhaps it will serve as a reminder for reflection of all of our conduct, basically.
Yes, and as you say, we've heard at many LLG conferences, the LGA give us the results of their surveys, and the link between what happens nationally and what happens locally is really well made from the evidence that they see. Now, on this question of ethics, Chalmers said parliamentary representatives bear a particularly significant responsibility, not only for representing constituents, but for upholding high standards of ethical conduct. He says MPs hold a unique position in our democracy with a responsibility to serve the public's interest within the requirements of the 7 principles of public life, the Nolan principles, of course. These long-established principles of selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, and leadership are a personal responsibility. That's how he describes it in the letter.
Got to be right.
And all of them reflect what the public rightly expects of all those in public life. But here's another question. What will LLG be doing during the campaign? Does it have particular messages that will be emphasized during this particular time?
Well, I think, as you said, upholding ethical conduct and application of the Nolan principles. But we've already delivered a hugely successful elections conference. And of course, our members have been well prepped from the local elections, mayoral elections and police commissioner elections, which have recently taken place. And in a sense, of course, the general election this year, whilst far more demanding in terms of volume and numbers, at least it sees just the one election taking place, which removes some of the complexity of multiple elections taking place at the same time. That said, we know our members value support in this area. And so we have dedicated a plenary session at our spring conference on the 7th of June at Leeds, which we would encourage everyone to attend in person to get back to that support and networking. But for those who have difficulties traveling or commitments, that is available remotely as well. So I would urge everyone to consider taking up that opportunity. Aside from that, you will continue with the valued bulletin, Dennis, and we'll continue to raise points of interest in the podcast. And just a reminder to members that there is the LLG forum where you can post discussion points if you want to find out what others are doing. And it's a closed group, 2 members, and there's lots of sharing of information on there. So please do take advantage of that. Before we wrap up, Dennis, I think it'd be really helpful to just go over the key dates and next steps as far as Parliament is concerned, now that the election date's been announced.
Well, yes, Parliament will now be dissolved on the 30th of May under the terms of the Dissolution and Calling of Parliament Act 2022. And you'll remember that this replaced the provisions for fixed parliaments, thus leaving the Prime Minister to have the flexibility to call an election whenever he thought fit. However, dissolution is still a royal prerogative, power exercisable by the Crown on the Prime Minister's advice. And currently, we're in this period known as the 5-day wash-up period. I'd not come across this term before this election campaign. Now, during this period, consideration is given to unfinished parliamentary business. It'll be all sorted out. And as we've seen recently in the media, some high-level legislation that we thought was going to be passed is being cast aside. Things that have been discussed and fought out are being just put to one side now during this wash-up period. On dissolution, every parliamentary seat becomes vacant. And of course, during the campaign, government activity is restricted during the pre-election period. And I think you'll have more on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, to be clear on this, both government and local authority resources, I know our members know, but they cannot be used for party political campaigning at any time during the period of heightened sensitivity. So particular care needs to be given. Now, government departments and councils will normally observe discretion about making any new announcements during the period or decisions that could influence voters. So for a general election, the pre-election period of sensitivity is not a set or specific date, but the start date is conventionally taken to be when Parliament is dissolved. That's very much for central government. For local government, I think it's important to take account of paragraph 34 of the recommended code of practice for local authority publicity, which sees the period as being between the notice of an election and the election itself. And that's just an important distinction to be aware of. And I know that the LGA has recently sent out some communications on that. And there's also some traffic in the LLG forum if you want to go and have a look. So on that note, you can get coverage of many more items from the bulletin and by listening to the Grapevine podcast, also available on Spotify. So thanks for joining me today, Dennis.
Right, and goodbye from me. See you again.
Bye-bye.